Morgan Price came home at 6:30 from a 9-hour shift at the pediatric rehabilitation clinic, where she worked as an occupational therapist, still wearing her scrubs, with the specific total body tiredness that comes from spending 9 hours in close, careful physical contact with children, lifting and repositioning and guiding and steadying, the particular labor of a job that is physical and emotional and cognitive simultaneously. That requires you to be fully present at the beginning and fully present at the end, and all the hours in between. It had been a hard Saturday. 3 of her regular patients were working through plateaus, those frustrating periods where progress stalls, and you have to help the child and the family understand that plateaus are part of the trajectory, that the work still matters even when the visible results temporarily stop. She had spent 45 minutes with a 7-year-old named Caleb and his mother, helping them both through the particular discouragement of a plateau, and the conversation had required everything she had and had been worth everything it required. She came in through the garage door, set her bag down, and heard the house the way you hear a house when it has been in motion without you, slightly rearranged, the particular quality of a space that has recently contained more energy than it currently held. Derek was in the kitchen. Lily, their 4-year-old daughter, was in the bath. Morgan could hear the specific splashing and singing that Lily produced during bath time, which was one of the sounds she most loved in the world, and that she took in for a moment from the doorway before going to find her husband. "Hey," she said. Hey, he was at the counter, not cooking, just standing, with the particular quality of someone who is occupying space rather than doing something in it. He had his phone face down on the counter beside him. "Good day." "Yeah," he said, "fine." She registered the flatness of his voice as tiredness, which was reasonable. Derek worked Saturdays occasionally at the architecture firm, and she assumed he'd had a long day of his own. She opened the refrigerator to find something for dinner. Her own phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. A text from Helen Price, her mother-in-law, with 4 words and an attachment. The 4 words were, "We had such fun." The attachment was a photo. Morgan looked at the photo. The photo showed her daughter Lily, sitting at a table wearing a paper birthday crown, in front of a pink layered cake with 4 candles, surrounded by people. Family people, Helen and Bill, Derek's sister Carla and her husband, 2 of Derek's cousins, 3 children Morgan recognized as Carla's kids and the cousins' children. Everyone was looking at Lily. Everyone was smiling. Lily was smiling too, the specific enormous smile of a 4-year-old who is the center of everything and knows it and loves it. It was a birthday party. Lily's birthday was in 6 days. Morgan looked at the photo for a long moment. Then she looked at Derek. He was already looking at her. He had been waiting for her to look at him. His expression was the expression of a man who has known something was coming and has been dreading the arrival. "Derek," she said. "I know," he said. "My daughter had a birthday party today." "I know." "I was at work today." "I know." "Did you know," she said, not loud, careful, the question that the expression on his face had already answered. He was quiet for one moment too long. "Yes," he said. The bath sounds continued from upstairs, Lily's voice floating down through the house, singing a song she had made up herself about a fish and a castle, as if nothing had happened and nothing would, as if the world outside her bath time was the same world it had been before 6:47 p.m. Morgan looked at her husband. She looked at the photo on her phone. She looked at her husband again. She put the phone in her pocket. "I'm going to say goodnight to Lily," she said, "and then we need to talk." "I know," he said. She went upstairs. He said "I know" 4 times before I asked the question. When I asked if he had known, he was quiet for one moment too long. That moment. That was the one that cost the most. By the time Morgan came back downstairs, Helen had sent 11 more photos. She had not intended to receive them sequentially. She had sent Morgan one photo, and then, apparently interpreting the absence of an immediate response as an invitation to continue, had sent the rest in a steady stream over the following 20 minutes. Morgan found them on her phone in the order Helen had sent them, a documentary record of the afternoon she had not been present for. She sat at the kitchen table and went through them. Derek sat across from her. She did not speak while she went through the photos, and he did not speak either, which was its own kind of respect for what she was doing. Photo 1, the table setup, pink tablecloth, balloon arch in Lily's favorite color combination, pink and purple, which Morgan knew because she and Lily had discussed this extensively. A banner that said Happy 4th Birthday Lily, in letters that matched the balloon color scheme. Someone had put real effort into the table setup. The effort was meticulous and was also a knife. Photo 2, Lily in the dress. The pale yellow dress with the ruffle at the hem that had been hanging in Lily's closet since Morgan bought it 2 weeks ago, specifically for the birthday party Morgan had been planning. Lily was wearing it. Someone had dressed her in it. The dress had been in Lily's closet, and someone had put her in it for a party Morgan had not known was happening. Photo 3, the arrival shots, Derek's sister Carla coming in with her kids, Carla's husband holding a balloon, the cousins clustered in Helen's entryway with gifts wrapped in birthday paper. Photos 4 through 7, the party itself. Lily at the table. Lily opening gifts. Lily laughing with her cousins. Lily and Helen blowing out the 4 candles together, both of their faces lit in the candlelight, Lily's expression the expression that Morgan had been imagining in some version of her mind for months. The one specific to the 4th birthday, the one she would never get to see happen in real time, the one that now existed only in someone else's photographs. Photo 8, the cake cutting, Helen presiding, slice on a pink plate handed to Lily with great ceremony. Photo 9, a group shot, everyone assembled, Lily held in Helen's arms at the center. Derek was in this photo. He was smiling. He was present at his daughter's birthday party, the one his wife had not been told about, and he was smiling. Photo 10, Lily covered in frosting, laughing, held up to show the camera. The photograph of a genuinely happy child, unambiguously happy, loved and celebrated and adored. Photo 11, Lily asleep in the backseat of the car on the way home, one hand still holding a piece of birthday ribbon, the paper crown slightly askew on her sleeping head. Morgan set her phone face down on the kitchen table. She looked at the table's surface for a moment. Then she looked at her husband. "Tell me everything," she said. Photo 9, Derek was in the group shot. He was smiling. He was present at his daughter's birthday party, the one his wife had not been told about, and he was smiling. I looked at that photo for a long time. He told her everything. He told it in the order it had happened, which was the order Morgan needed it in, because the order was its own information. What was decided when, by whom, at what point Derek had known, and at what point Derek had had opportunities to tell her and had chosen not to. Helen had called him 3 weeks ago. She had said she wanted to do something special for Lily's 4th birthday, that she had an idea for a family gathering on the Saturday before the actual birthday, that she had checked and knew Morgan was working that day. She had said she thought it would be a nice opportunity for the Price side to celebrate Lily specifically, that it would be a grandparents' party rather than the main party, and that she just needed Derek to bring Lily over at 11. Derek had said he'd think about it. Helen had called again 4 days later. She had the menu planned. She had ordered the cake. She had invited Carla and the cousins. She just needed Derek to confirm. Derek had confirmed. "You confirmed," Morgan said. "Yes." 3 weeks ago. "Yes." "And in 3 weeks, you didn't tell me." "No." She was very still. She had developed stillness in the way that people who work with children in pain develop stillness. As a tool, as a form of presence, as the container that holds the space steady when the space would otherwise be destabilized by reaction. She used it now not to protect Derek from her reaction, but to protect herself from the version of this conversation that would feel immediately satisfying and be ultimately useless. Why, she said. Derek was quiet for a moment. He had the look of a man who has been rehearsing an answer and has now arrived at the moment of saying it and found that none of his rehearsals were adequate. She said, he stopped. Mom said she thought if you knew, you'd want to change the date or add it to the main party planning or make it more complicated than she intended it to be. She said she just wanted to do something simple for Lily without it turning into a whole thing. Morgan sat with this. She said you would make it complicated, Morgan said. Yes. And you agreed with that assessment. I didn't think it was, he stopped. He started again. I didn't want to deal with the conflict. If I told you and you had feelings about it, I would have been in the middle. And if I told Mom that you didn't want it to happen, she would have been upset. And I convinced myself that this was just a family gathering and that you'd understand when you saw the photos that it was a nice thing. You convinced yourself, Morgan said, that showing me the photos of a birthday party I hadn't known was happening would feel to me like a nice thing. He looked at his hands. I knew it wasn't right, he said. I knew from the beginning, I made the wrong choice. Repeatedly, over 3 weeks, I kept making it. This was honest. She gave him credit for the honesty. It did not make her less hurt, but she gave him credit for it. Derek, she said, I need you to think about something. And I need you to think about it seriously, not as a rhetorical question. Okay. If my parents had organized a birthday party for Lily on a day they knew you were working, and I had known about it for 3 weeks and said nothing, and you came home to photos, what would you have done? The silence was complete. She let it be complete. I would have been angry, he said finally, very angry. At my parents. Yes, and at you. And you would have had every right to be, she said, because it would have been a serious violation of your place in your daughter's life, performed by my parents, enabled by me, and the enabling would have been the part that hurt most, because my parents don't know better, you do. He looked at her for a long moment. I know, he said. This time the words had different weight than the earlier I knows. Those had been the I knows of a man waiting for the storm, preemptively conceding. This one was the I know of a man who has actually understood something. Are you going to hear me out on the full conversation? She said. Yes. Because the Helen and Bill conversation needs to happen too, and I need you present for it. Not managing it, not protecting them from it. Present. When's? Tomorrow, she said. Can we do tomorrow? Yes, he said. Good, she said. She stood up. I'm going to make us dinner, and we're going to eat, and tonight is tonight. Tomorrow is the conversation. She opened the refrigerator. Her hands were steady. She noted that her hands were steady and filed it for later. I asked him, if my parents had done this to you, what would you have done? He said, I would have been very angry, at your parents and at you. I said, you would have had every right, because the enabling is the part that hurts most. He knows better, they don't. Helen Price was 60 years old, a retired elementary school teacher, a woman who had organized her retirement around the project of being a grandmother in the specific, all in a way that some women approach the role, with the energy and intention and logistical commitment of a second career. She baked. She kept a dedicated toy room at the house in Scottsdale. She had a folder on her phone labeled Lily with approximately 400 photographs. She loved Lily with a ferocity that was genuine and large and real. She also had a long history of specific friction with Morgan that had begun before the wedding and had never fully resolved itself into anything comfortable. The friction was not dramatic. Helen was not a cruel woman, did not make overt unkind statements, did not position herself as an adversary. It was subtler and in some ways more wearing. the friction of a woman who had a clear idea of how things should be done and found Morgan's way of doing things consistently, quietly, slightly insufficient. Morgan was a pediatric occupational therapist who worked 4 long days and 1 shorter day per week, and whose schedule had the unpredictability of a clinical role. Some Saturdays, some early evenings, coverage when colleagues were out. Her work was demanding and she was good at it, and it mattered enormously to the children she served and their families. Helen acknowledged this in the way that people acknowledge things they cannot fully dispute, briefly, in passing, as a preamble to something else. Morgan works so hard, it must be difficult to find time to do the parties the way you want to do them. That sentence, said at a family dinner in November, was the closest Helen had come in 5 years to naming the thing that had actually been said at 6:47 on a Saturday in April. Morgan would make it complicated. What Morgan would make complicated, in Helen's operational vocabulary, was the management of events according to Helen's preferences. Morgan had opinions about Lily's diet that did not always match Helen's opinions about what grandchildren should be fed. Morgan had a birthday party vision for Lily's 4th birthday that had been developing for months. She had talked about it, had shared ideas with Derek, had been building it in the specific detailed way of a person who is excited about something. Helen had heard about the vision, and had, apparently, decided that the vision was not her vision, and that her version could simply be executed in advance on a day when Morgan's inconvenient opinions would not be present to interfere. Morgan had thought about this, lying awake on Saturday night after Derek was asleep, thinking through what had been done and what it meant. She had thought about it with the clinical precision she brought to her work, not because this was a clinical situation, but because the clinical precision was her best tool for understanding complex things without being overwhelmed by the emotional weight of them. What Helen had done was not, at its core, about the birthday party. It was about who was in charge of Lily's experience. Helen believed, at some functional level below conscious articulation, that she had a right to a version of her granddaughter that existed independent of and parallel to Morgan's version. A version that did not have to consult Morgan, did not have to accommodate Morgan's vision, did not have to make room for Morgan's preferences or ideas or presence. The birthday party was the most extreme expression of this belief she had enacted yet, but it was not the first expression. Bill Price was 63, a retired contractor, a quieter man than Helen who had spent his retirement largely in the workshop he had built in the garage, making things with his hands that he gave to family members and neighbors, and occasionally to strangers. He was gentle with Lily, physically present in the way of a man who had grown up building things, and who held a child the way you hold something you intend to last. Morgan did not have significant conflict with Bill. Bill was, in the Taylor-Price family topology, someone who went along, with Helen, with whatever the general direction of the room was, with the current of family decisions that Helen organized and Bill moved through without much resistance. He had been at the party. He had been present for the decision that produced the party. He had not called Morgan. In this sense, he was complicit in the same way Derek was complicit, not the author, but the person who knew and said nothing. Morgan had met Derek at 24 in the graduate program at Arizona State, where she was completing her occupational therapy degree, and he was finishing his architecture graduate work. They had been together for 6 years, married for 3, and she had loved him with the specific love that develops between two people who have grown into their adult selves together. A love that had their shared history woven through it, that was more layered and complex and textured than the love of a beginning. She had also spent 3 years noticing a pattern in Derek that she had named in her own mind, but had not yet named plainly to him: the pattern of the path of least resistance. Derek was not a conflict-seeking man. He was, in fact, conflict-averse in a way that was architectural. It was built into his approach to difficult things, had been built into it by a childhood in a household where Helen managed conflict by removing its sources and Bill managed conflict by absenting himself from it. Derek had learned to manage conflict by choosing whichever option generated the least immediate friction. When the option that generated the least immediate friction was Morgan, Derek chose the option that wasn't Morgan. She had let this pattern continue longer than she should have, which was her own accounting, and she owned it. She had smoothed things over and absorbed the friction, and told herself that managing the in-law dynamic was part of being in a marriage, and that Derek trying was enough. She had told herself this because the alternative, saying clearly that Derek's trying was not enough, that the pattern had a cost, that choosing the path of least resistance at her expense was a choice she was not willing to keep subsidizing, was a harder conversation than the path of least resistance allowed. Saturday had ended the path of least resistance. Not because Morgan had decided to end it dramatically, because the birthday party had been too large a thing for the path to hold. When the option that generated the least friction was me, Derek chose the option that wasn't me. I had let this go too long. The birthday party was too large a thing for the path to hold. Morgan had spent Sunday morning doing two things: being fully present with Lily, who was 4 and radiant, and had no knowledge of anything that had happened the previous evening, and deserved a Sunday morning with her mother that was exactly as good as Sunday mornings were supposed to be. They had made pancakes with the specific child-in-the-kitchen chaos that Lily produced in any cooking situation, eaten them with too much syrup, read 3 books, and spent 45 minutes in the backyard with the sprinkler running, because Lily had decided that Sunday was a sprinkler day, and Morgan agreed with Lily's assessment. She had also been thinking, not with the raw emotional processing of the Saturday night, that had been necessary, and she had done it, in the private space of the bedroom after Derek was asleep, fully and without performance. Sunday morning was the next phase, the clarity, the organization of what needed to be said, to whom, in what order, with what objective. She was not going to the Sunday conversation to punish Helen and Bill. She was going to the Sunday conversation to set something in place that had not been in place before, and to make sure everyone in the room understood what had changed and why. The punishment framing was emotionally available but practically useless. Punishment requires the other party to share your assessment of what they did, and Helen did not share Morgan's assessment, which was precisely why Sunday was necessary. They drove to Scottsdale at 11, all 3 of them, Morgan, Derek, and Lily, who was in the backseat with her new birthday gift from yesterday. A stuffed elephant named Percy that she had already integrated into her personal universe, with the completeness and speed that 4-year-olds bring to object attachment, and was singing something to Percy about what kind of food elephants preferred. Helen opened the door before they rang the bell. She had the expression of a woman who had processed the previous evening's silence from Morgan and had landed on an interpretation she was comfortable with, that Morgan had been tired from work, that the photos had been received as the nice thing they were intended to be, that everything was fine. She had reorganized the narrative of Saturday into something comfortable overnight. Come in, she said. I made coffee. Lily, baby, Percy is adorable." Lily held Percy up for inspection. Helen admired Percy with the full commitment she brought to Lily's preferred topics. Bill came in from the workshop, wiping his hands on a cloth, and picked Lily up in the easy way of a grandfather who has been picking up this specific child since she was an infant. "Bill, can you take Lily out back for a bit?" Morgan said. "I'd like to have a few minutes with you and Helen." Bill looked at her, then at Derek, then at Helen. He set Lily down and took her hand and went out to the backyard, because Bill understood how to read a room even if he rarely acted on the reading. Morgan, Derek, and Helen sat at the kitchen table. Helen poured coffee with a brightness that was working hard, the brightness of someone who has decided to be cheerful as a form of preemptive management. "Helen," Morgan said, "I need to talk to you about yesterday." "We had so much fun," Helen said. "Did you see the photos? Lily was she was so happy. The cake turned out beautifully, Helen," Morgan said her name the way she said the name of a child in her clinic who needed to come back from somewhere else to be present in the room. Not unkind, precise. "I need you to hear me." Helen's brightness dimmed slightly. She set down her coffee mug. You organized and held a birthday party for my daughter, Morgan said. You chose a date when you knew I was working. You did not tell me it was happening. You invited family, chose a venue, selected a menu, ordered a cake, put my daughter in a dress I bought for a party I am planning, photographed the entire event, and sent me the photos at 6:47 yesterday evening when the party was over and Lily was on her way home. Helen opened her mouth. I'm not finished, Morgan said. You made a decision about my daughter's birthday celebration, one of the most significant annual events in the life of a 4-year-old, without consulting me, without informing me, and with the specific knowledge that I was unavailable. And when I asked Derek why I hadn't been told, he said you believed I would make it complicated. Helen's expression shifted. The brightness was fully gone now, replaced by something more complicated, the expression of a woman who has been called to account for something she has not fully accounted for herself. I just wanted to do something special for Lily, Helen said. Something from our family, on our side. I didn't think it would. Helen, I need to say something carefully so it's understood, Morgan said. You are Lily's grandmother, you love her, I know that, I have never questioned that. But Lily is my daughter. Not a shared child in the sense that her milestones and celebrations are available for anyone to claim. She is my daughter. I am her mother. I did not miss my daughter's birthday party because I was irresponsible or absent or uninterested. I missed it because you organized it specifically on a day when I would be absent, and did not tell me it was happening. A silence. I thought, Helen started. What did you think I would make complicated? Morgan said. It was a genuine question, delivered with the directness of someone who needs the answer to be said plainly, because plain is the only form in which it can be addressed. Helen looked at the table. She looked at Derek. Then she said, I thought you'd want to change things, the menu, maybe, or the timing, or how it coordinated with whatever you're planning for her actual birthday. I just wanted to do it my way without my input, Morgan said. Without it becoming a whole production, Helen said. And then, perhaps hearing herself, she stopped. Morgan looked at Helen, with the steady attention she had brought to the room. My presence at my daughter's birthday celebration is not a production, she said. It is my right as her mother. And your desire to celebrate Lily without the complication of coordinating with me does not supersede that right. What you did yesterday was not a gift to Lily. It was a choice to exclude me from something that belonged to me to be present for. I need you to understand that. Helen was quiet for a long moment. Bill had come back to the doorway with Lily and was standing there with the expression of a man who understood what room he was re-entering. Lily was oblivious, Percy firmly in hand, examining a potted plant near the door with great focus. Bill, Morgan said without turning. You were there too, you knew. I want to say to you the same thing I'm saying to Helen. I'm not angry at you in the same way because I don't believe you organized this. But you knew, and you said nothing, and saying nothing was a choice. Bill looked at his wife, then at Morgan. You're right, he said. I should have called you. It was a simple statement, and it was real. Morgan acknowledged it with a nod. Helen said, I'm sorry. She said it with the specific difficulty of a woman for whom apology required overcoming a genuine resistance, which meant it was not a smooth apology, not a practiced or easy one. It had friction in it. It was real. I hear that, Morgan said. I'm going to tell you what I need going forward, and then I'd like us to be able to move on from this. Because I want Lily to have her grandparents, and I want you to have Lily. But on terms that include me. She laid it out, simply, specifically, without a long list that would dilute each point. 3 things. First, any celebration involving Lily required Morgan's knowledge and agreement, not Morgan's management of every detail. She was not asking to run every grandparent event. Awareness and agreement. If it happened to Lily, Morgan knew about it. Second, if Helen had an idea for an event or gathering involving Lily, she brought it to both Morgan and Derek together, not to Derek alone. The both together was important. The separate and manage approach, going through Derek to avoid Morgan, was not an available path. Third, the dress in the closet. Morgan said this carefully. The dress in Lily's closet that she wore yesterday, I bought that for her birthday party. For the party I am planning, I need you to understand that using it yesterday was taking something that wasn't yours to take. I'm not going to ask you to address this with Lily. She doesn't know it happened, and I'm not going to make her responsible for it. But I need you to know I noticed. Helen's expression at the dress sentence told Morgan the dress had been deliberate. Whether deliberate in the calculated sense, or in the sense of a woman who saw a pretty dress and put her granddaughter in it without stopping to think about where it had come from and why, Morgan could not say with certainty. But the expression told her it had been noticed, and it had not been an accident. I'll replace the dress, Helen said quietly. That's not necessary, Morgan said. I'm going to have Lily wear it on her birthday as planned. I'm mentioning it so the full picture is understood. Helen nodded. They sat for a moment, in the specific quiet of a conversation that has said what it needed to say, and is waiting to find out what comes after. Can Percy have some water? Lily asked from the doorway. She held up the elephant. He's thirsty. Everyone in the room looked at Lily. Of course he can, Morgan said. Come on in, Bug. Lily came in. The conversation was over. The room recalibrated around her presence, which was, as it always was, the most important thing in it. I said, my presence at my daughter's birthday celebration is not a production. It is my right as her mother. Your desire to celebrate Lily without the complication of my input does not supersede that right. What you did was not a gift to Lily. It was a choice to exclude me. The Helen and Bill conversation had been the one Morgan had prepared for. The Derek conversation, which happened in the car on the way home with Lily asleep in the backseat and then continued in the kitchen while Lily napped, was the one that mattered more. She had known, from the Saturday night and through the Sunday morning, that the two conversations were different in kind. The Helen and Bill conversation was about boundaries and the violation of those boundaries, and what the repair looked like going forward. It was difficult and necessary, and she had handled it well, and it had produced what it needed to produce. The Derek conversation was about something more fundamental. It was about who Derek was in their marriage, and what she needed from him, and what he had been failing to provide. And the birthday party was the most visible and extreme instance of the failure, but not its origin. She had been gentle with him on Saturday night. Not performing gentleness, she had not pretended to be less hurt than she was. But she had understood that the conversation they needed to have required him to be present and non-defensive, and battering him into defensiveness on Saturday night would have produced a Saturday night conversation that was satisfying in the short term and useless in the medium term. Sunday afternoon was the medium term. You were in the photo, she said. They were on the 101, Lily asleep behind them, Derek driving. Photo 9, the group shot, you were smiling. He said nothing. I've looked at that photo a lot since last night, she said. You were at our daughter's birthday party. At a party that your wife, your daughter's mother, didn't know was happening. And you were smiling. I know how that looks, he said. Tell me how it looks to you. He was quiet for a moment. It looks like I chose my parents over you, he said, and over what was right. Yes, she said, that is how it looks because that is what it was. I know. Derek, I need to say some things to you, and I need you to hear them completely. Not defend against them. Hear them. Okay. You have a pattern, she said. Not just with this. A pattern of choosing the path that creates the least friction with your parents, specifically with your mother, even when that path costs me something. I have absorbed that pattern for 3 years. I have absorbed it because I love you, and because I told myself that managing the in-law dynamic was part of the deal, and because sometimes it was easier to absorb it than to address it. She paused. Outside, the Phoenix landscape moved past, the specific flat geometry of the valley in the afternoon light. 3 weeks ago, you confirmed a birthday party for our daughter that I didn't know about and said nothing. For 3 weeks. That is not a mistake. That is a choice, made repeatedly over 21 days. Each morning you woke up knowing and chose not to tell me. That is the thing I need you to sit with, not the single bad decision. The 21 mornings. He was very still. Why, she said, tell me honestly why. Because if I told you, he said, you would have been upset. And if I tried to cancel it, if I went back to my mom and said Morgan doesn't know and she needs to know and this can't happen, my mom would have been upset. And I would have been in the middle of both of you being upset and I couldn't, he stopped. I couldn't make myself do it. You couldn't make yourself do the right thing because it was hard, Morgan said. Yes. Derek, that is not a marriage, she said. A marriage is two people who choose each other. Not two people where one person consistently chooses the path of least resistance and the other person absorbs the cost. I have been absorbing it. I need to stop absorbing it, and I need you to understand why. I do understand. I don't think you fully do yet, she said. Not unkindly, directly. I want to ask you something and I want you to think about it seriously. If the situations were reversed, if my parents had organized a birthday party for Lily on a day you were working, and I had known about it for 3 weeks and said nothing, and sent you the photos that evening, what would you have felt? She had asked him this on Saturday night. She was asking it again, in the car, in the daylight, without the raw emotion of the night before behind it, because she needed him to answer it without the fog of Saturday's shock. He thought for a moment, a real moment, not a performance of thought. I would have felt erased, he said, from my daughter's life, like a decision had been made that I wasn't real enough to be included. Yes, she said. And I would have been furious at you, he said, not just at your parents, at you, for letting it happen. Yes, she said, because the parents overstepping is one thing, the spouse who knows and says nothing is the thing that makes it possible. The parents can't do this without the spouse's silence. Your silence was the mechanism. He was quiet for a long time. I don't want to be the mechanism, he said. I know you don't, she said. I believe that. But wanting not to be and not being are different things, Derek. And the difference requires you to actually do the hard thing when the hard thing is required. Not decide it in the abstract. Do it in the specific moment, when doing it means upsetting someone. They drove in silence for a while. Lily made a small sound in her sleep and resettled. What do I need to do? Derek said. I need you to be my partner when it's hard, Morgan said. Not just when it's easy. When your mother calls with a plan that doesn't include me, I need you to be the person who says, that doesn't work. Morgan needs to be part of this. Let me talk to her first. Every time. Not because I'm demanding to be in control of everything. Because I am Lily's mother and your wife, and I should not be an afterthought in my own family. I can do that, he said. She looked at him. She had learned, in 6 years, how to read the difference between Derek meaning something and Derek saying it. He meant it. I know, she said. I think you can. I need to see it, though. That's how it becomes real. I know, he said. They pulled into the driveway. Lily woke up at the stop and immediately asked about Percy and whether elephants liked the swimming pool. Morgan turned around and looked at her daughter, awake and untroubled, and moving seamlessly into the next thing the way 4-year-olds do, and felt the particular quality of love that has no adequate language. The love that is also a kind of ache. The love that is the reason all of this mattered. The love that was the why of every hard conversation she had had in the last 24 hours. Not the swimming pool, she told Lily, but definitely the bathtub. Lily considered this. Okay, she said, Percy can try the bathtub. They went inside. I said, the parents overstepping is one thing. The spouse who knows and says nothing is what makes it possible. Your silence was the mechanism, he said. I don't want to be the mechanism. I said, wanting not to be and not being are different things. The birthday party Morgan had been planning for Lily's fourth birthday happened on the following Saturday, 6 days after the Scottsdale conversation, on Lily's actual birthday. It was a backyard party with 12 children and an assortment of parents who stood around with drinks and talked about the things parents of 4-year-olds talked about while their children ran in all directions, and someone periodically fell down and needed brief comfort and was immediately fine and running again. There was a bounce house Morgan had rented from the company Lily had pointed at from the car 3 months ago and said those people have the best things, a declaration Morgan had filed immediately and honored. There was the yellow dress with the ruffle hem. There was a cake Morgan had ordered from a bakery downtown that made it exactly as Lily had described it to Morgan over a period of 3 months of increasingly specific negotiation. Pink, 4 candles, a unicorn on top, and something Morgan had not been able to source as a real element, but had asked the bakery to render in fondant, which was what Lily called a rainbow waterfall, which turned out to be exactly as described, and which Lily examined for a full 30 seconds before declaring it perfect. Helen and Bill were there. Morgan had invited them, not as a gesture of performed forgiveness. The conversation in Scottsdale had happened and had done what it needed to do, and the forward relationship was going to be built on the terms Morgan had set, which were clear and non-negotiable. She had invited them because they were Lily's grandparents and Lily loved them, and because what Morgan wanted was a family in which she was included, not a family from which Helen and Bill were excluded. The goal was never their exclusion. The goal was her inclusion. Helen had arrived with a gift and a cautiousness that was different from her usual manner, a tentativeness that told Morgan the Sunday conversation had landed, that something had shifted in Helen's understanding of where the lines were. She had not tried to organize anything. She had not made suggestions about the menu, or the timing, or the arrangement of the party elements. She had stayed near Bill and near Lily, and had been, by the measure of Morgan's observation, exactly what a grandmother was supposed to be at a birthday party: present, loving, and not in charge. Derek had been everywhere. He had blown up the balloon arch with the focused determination of a man who was performing husband as a deliberate act rather than a habit, helping in ways that were visible and sustained. He had managed the bounce house queue when it got out of hand. He had refilled drinks. He had set up the cake table with the specific spatial attention of an architect, applying his professional skills to the arrangement of birthday candles. When Morgan looked at him across the backyard in the middle of the party, he was always somewhere useful, doing something that needed to be done. When it was time for the candles, Morgan was there. She had known she would be. She had scheduled her work coverage with that specific intention, had arranged the one Saturday that was fully free, and had organized everything else around it. But standing at the table with the lights dimmed and 12 children, and their parents crowded around, and Lily in her yellow dress in front of the unicorn cake with the rainbow waterfall, Morgan felt something she had been working toward for 6 days: the specific, irreplaceable rightness of being exactly where you belong. Lily looked up at her across the cake. 4 candles, 4 years, the enormous smile. "Mommy, you're here," Lily said. "I'm here, Bug," Morgan said. "Good," said Lily, "because I can't blow them all out by myself." Morgan laughed. She leaned down beside her daughter. They blew out the 4 candles together. Lily said, "Mommy, you're here, 4 years old." She said it like it was the most important fact of the afternoon. "I'm here, Bug," I said. "Good," she said, "because I can't blow them all out by myself." We blew them out together. Morgan had a habit of doing what she called the full accounting in the aftermath of difficult things. Not rumination, she was precise about the difference. Rumination circled the same terrain repeatedly without destination, the same pain accessed and reaccessed without purpose. The full accounting had a destination: understanding. It was the deliberate process of understanding a situation fully enough to extract what was useful and set down what was not. She did the full accounting of the birthday party situation over the 2 weeks that followed Lily's party. On Helen Helen had done something serious and specifically harmful. The seriousness was not about the party itself in isolation. Lily had been loved and happy and celebrated, which was real and good. The seriousness was about what the party represented and what it required to be possible. The active and deliberate exclusion of Morgan from a milestone in her daughter's life, organized specifically around her absence, and explained with a reason that was its own kind of injury. Morgan would make it complicated. The explanation positioned Morgan's presence as a problem to be solved rather than a right to be respected. It was a statement about Morgan's standing in her own family, made by someone who had no standing to make it. She did not believe Helen would fully change. She was 30 years old and had been a pediatric occupational therapist for 4 years, and she had worked with enough families to understand that people's fundamental orientations, their deep habits of how they relate to the people around them, did not usually transform as the result of a single confrontational conversation, however clear and direct. Helen would probably remain, for the rest of her life, someone who wanted to manage Lily's experience according to her own preferences. The Sunday conversation had not changed this. What it had changed was what was available to Helen without consequences. The Sunday conversation had established consequences. Helen knew now what would happen if she proceeded as she had proceeded on the Saturday in April. Whether that knowledge would be sufficient to change her behavior would be established over time. Morgan intended to hold the line with consistency rather than outrage, not because she was suppressing the outrage, but because she knew from her clinical work that consistent expectations, maintained calmly, were more effective than dramatic interventions. Calm and clear. Every time. On Derek. The full accounting of Derek was harder because it required her to account for her own role in the pattern. She had let the pattern run for 3 years. She had absorbed friction she should have named. She had chosen the easier conversation over the necessary one in instances where the necessary conversation would have prevented what happened in April, or at minimum would have made it far less likely to happen. She owned this. She was not going to use it to reduce Derek's accountability. His choices were his, and the 21 mornings were his, but it was her part of the picture, and she was honest with herself about it. What she had seen in Derek, since the Sunday conversation, was something she was choosing to treat as real until it demonstrated otherwise. A person who had understood what had been done and was actively engaged in doing it differently. He had called his mother twice in the 2 weeks after the Sunday conversation, in Morgan's presence, and both times a version of the old dynamic had appeared. Helen raising something about Lily's upcoming dental appointment, about a family trip being discussed for the summer, and both times Derek had said, "Let me talk to Morgan and we'll get back to you. Not let me handle it. Not I'll figure it out. Let me talk to Morgan." The "let me talk to Morgan" was the difference. Small sentence, enormous change. She was watching. She was choosing to believe the change was real. She was also clear, with herself if not yet said aloud to Derek, that the next serious instance, the next time something happened to Lily that Derek knew about and Morgan didn't, by his choice, would require a different kind of conversation, one that went to the structural question of the marriage rather than to the specific incident. She hoped it would not be required. She had reason, right now, to believe it would not be required. She was choosing to believe. This was its own kind of work, the work of trusting again after trust had been broken, the daily practice of not letting the broken thing calcify into something permanent when the evidence suggested the break was being repaired. On herself, this was the shortest part of the full accounting and in some ways the most important. She had been angry. The anger had been completely justified and appropriate, and she had felt it fully and she did not regret it. She had also handled the anger well, had not let it produce the kind of conversation that creates casualties in excess of its objectives. She had been clear without being cruel. She had been specific without being exhaustive. She had said exactly what needed to be said to exactly the people who needed to hear it, in the order and form that was most likely to produce understanding, rather than just catharsis. She had been present at her daughter's birthday party. Lily had looked up at her across the cake and said, "Mommy, you're here." She had been there. That was the whole of what needed to be said about herself. Lily Price did not know that 2 birthday parties had been held for her turning 4. She would not know for years, if she ever fully knew, and the question of when and whether to tell her was one Morgan and Derek had agreed to defer until Lily was old enough to have the full context, and until there was a reason, therapeutic or simply honest, to give it to her. What Lily knew was simpler and more important. She knew that her birthday party had a bounce house and a unicorn cake with a rainbow waterfall and 12 friends, who mostly ran in circles, which was Lily's preferred mode of celebration. She knew that her mother had been there, had blown out the candles with her, had eaten pink cake with her and pronounced it excellent, had danced with her to the birthday playlist Morgan had made that included 3 Lily-requested songs and 1 Morgan-requested song that Lily vetoed after 15 seconds, and then allowed back in after renegotiation. She knew that Grandma Helen and Grandpa Bill had come and had given her a gift, and had hugged her, and told her she was the best 4-year-old in the world, which was a claim Lily received with the complete uncritical acceptance of a child who has no reason to doubt it. She knew that her father had been everywhere at the party, had carried her on his shoulders at one point during a ceremonial lap of the backyard that she had requested and received, had made 3 separate trips to replenish the juice boxes, and had sung the birthday song directly to her at a volume and enthusiasm she found satisfying. She knew that Percy, the elephant, had been introduced to 12 other stuffed animals at the party, which had gone well by Lily's assessment, and that Percy was now fully integrated into the household ecosystem in a way that suggested permanence. She knew none of the adult things. She held none of the adult weight. She was 4 years old and the party was good and her mother was there and her family loved her and the cake had a rainbow waterfall. This was what Morgan had been protecting. Not her own feelings, not her rights in the abstract, not the principle of the thing, though all of those were real and legitimate. The specific, protected, ordinary happiness of a 4-year-old at her birthday party, who does not have to carry adult information she hasn't earned, and whose mother blows out the candles beside her because that is exactly where her mother belongs. Morgan had put herself there. She had done it by refusing to be excluded from the calculation, by refusing to be the complication, by saying clearly to everyone who needed to hear it, I am here, and I am a necessary part of this, and the party does not happen without me being told about it and included in it because I am this child's mother, and that is not a minor fact. She was 4, she held none of the adult weight. The party was good and her mother was there and the cake had a rainbow waterfall. That was the whole of what I was protecting, not the principle, that exact thing. Morgan was precise about the word changed when she used it about Helen, because the precision mattered. Helen had not become a different person in the 6 months following the April party. She had not experienced a transformation that made the relationship easy or warm or fully comfortable. She was still Helen, still inclined to manage, still prone to the kind of suggestions that carried the implicit weight of opinions, still the person who called Derek first when she had an idea about Lily. What had changed was the behavior in the specific area of the boundary Morgan had established. Helen now called both of them together, or each of them with the understanding that it was a both and not a Derek only, when she had an idea involving Lily. This had happened 3 times since April, and each time Morgan had been part of the conversation, had been asked her preference about dates and formats, had been included as a matter of course rather than as an accommodation. The including had not been smooth. In the first 2 instances, Helen had the quality of someone consciously following a new protocol rather than someone for whom the protocol had become natural. By the 3rd instance, it was slightly less consciously performed. By the time the year ended, Morgan believed it would be closer to natural than to deliberate. Helen had also, and Morgan noted this carefully because it was the most significant change, stopped making the "we're just doing something simple for Lily" comments. The comments that positioned Morgan's involvement as a complicating factor rather than a given. These had been present in their interactions with a low-grade consistency for 3 years, and their absence since May was not accidental. Helen had understood what that framing cost, and she had stopped using it. Morgan was not warm with Helen in the way she might have been if the April party had not happened. She was civil, consistent, fair, and clear. She gave Helen genuine access to Lily within the terms of the established understanding, and she did not revisit the April party in any of their interactions since the Sunday conversation. The past had been addressed in the appropriate room with the appropriate people. She was not interested in ongoing reference to it. She was interested in the future. The future, built on terms that were real and held, was what she was building. Derek Price was, in the 6 months following the birthday party, the most changed element in the system Morgan was navigating. This was appropriate and also harder to live with than she had expected, because change in the people you love, genuine, working, effortful change, requires you to be present for the change rather than waiting for it to be complete, and being present for imperfect change, while the imperfection is ongoing, is more demanding than simply waiting. He was doing it differently, not always, not without slipping. In mid-July, Helen had called him about a summer barbecue she was planning, and he had said yes without talking to Morgan first, and had come home to tell her that there was a barbecue on the 14th, and then recognized, in Morgan's expression, that the old pattern had operated, and he had caught it 2 hours after the fact rather than in the moment. "I did it again," he said. "I said yes before I talked to you." "Yes," she said. "I'm going to call her back and tell her I need to check with you on the date." "Okay." He called Helen back in front of Morgan and said, "I should have talked to Morgan first. Let me confirm the date works for both of us." Helen had said of course. The date worked. The barbecue happened. But the step, the catching it, and correcting it rather than defending it, was different from the pattern. She told him this. She was specific about it. "That's exactly what I need. You're going to slip, we both will. The question is whether you catch it and correct it." You did. He had looked at her with the expression of someone who is genuinely trying, and is genuinely uncertain whether the trying is sufficient, and is receiving genuine feedback that it is. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for catching it," she said. This was what repair looked like in practice. Not a single declaration, not a grand gesture, but the accumulation of specific instances of doing the right thing and catching the wrong thing and being honest about both. Over 6 months, the accumulation had become substantial enough that Morgan was living differently in her marriage than she had been living before April, more clearly, more honestly, with less absorption and more direct communication. The April birthday party had been the worst thing that had happened in the marriage. It had also, obliquely and at genuine cost, been the event that had made a different version of the marriage possible. Morgan did not think of this as a silver lining. She would not do Helen and Derek the favor of reframing their choices as ultimately beneficial. What she thought of it as was, the cost turned out to have value. That was different. The cost was still real. The value was also real. This story is about a specific and increasingly common form of in-law overreach. The grandparent who has developed, through some combination of entitlement, genuine love, and the failure of the spouse to establish and hold limits, a relationship with their grandchild that operates independently of, and sometimes in explicit competition with the child's parent. Helen's version of what happened on the Saturday in April was almost certainly something like, "We celebrated Lily with family, and the photos showed her happy and loved, and Morgan will understand when she sees them." This version is not a lie in the factual sense. Lily was happy, the family was present, the photos are real. But it misses the actual violation, which is not about the quality of the party, but about the question of who gets to make decisions about a child's milestone experiences. Morgan did not miss the party because she was negligent or absent or uninvested. She missed it because it was organized specifically around her absence. She was not an afterthought. She was an intentional exclusion. The difference between those two things is the difference between an oversight and a decision, and what Helen made was a decision. The decision was made possible by Derek. This is the structural truth that the story cannot avoid. Grandparents can only operate in the spaces that the married couple's relationship allows them to operate in. When one spouse, consciously or through the habit of conflict avoidance, consistently prioritizes the path of least resistance with their parents over their obligations to their partner, they create the conditions for overreach. Helen could not have organized and executed the Saturday party without Derek's silence. His silence was not passive, it was active. 21 days of active silence. Morgan's response was organized around the two distinct conversations the situation required: the in-law conversation and the marriage conversation. She did not conflate them. She did not address Helen in terms of the marriage's failures, and she did not address Derek in terms that blamed Helen for what was fundamentally his responsibility. She held each conversation in its appropriate frame. The in-law conversation was about behavior and its consequences. The marriage conversation was about pattern and what the pattern cost. Both were necessary. Both were specific. Both were held with the steadiness of someone who had thought carefully about what she needed to say and was saying it in the service of a future she wanted to build rather than a past she needed to punish. This matters because the temptation, in situations like this, is to make the response the same size as the injury. The injury was real and large. The response Morgan chose was precise rather than large, not because precision was the only valid response, but because she is 30 years old and she is Lily's mother and she is Derek's wife, and she intends all three of those things to still be true in 10 years. And precision, in service of that intention, was the right tool. The dress in the closet. Morgan mentioned it to Helen on Sunday as one of three things, deliberately and last. She mentioned it because it was the most specific and telling detail in the full picture of what had happened. Someone had gone into Lily's closet and taken out the dress that was hanging there specifically for the party Morgan was planning, and had put Lily in it for a different party. Whether this was thoughtless or deliberate, the effect was the same. Morgan's preparation for her daughter's birthday had been used, without her knowledge, by someone else. The dress was a small thing in the physical sense. It was not a small thing in the symbolic sense. It was the clearest possible illustration of what the April party had actually been, not a parallel celebration, not an addition, but a substitution. A claim on something that belonged to Morgan. She wore the dress to the Saturday party. Lily wore it, rather, the yellow dress with the ruffle hem, on Lily's actual birthday, at the party Morgan had been planning for months, in front of 12 friends and 2 sets of grandparents and a mother who was present. The dress was just a dress, and also it was the whole story. Morgan Price is 30 years old and has been a pediatric occupational therapist for 4 years. She works primarily with children between the ages of 2 and 10 who have developmental differences, neurological conditions, and sensory processing challenges that affect their ability to engage with the world in the ways their bodies and minds are asking them to engage. She helps them. Specifically, practically, with the patient repetition of someone who understands that progress is nonlinear, and that the relationship between effort and outcome is real even when it is not visible on a given day. She chose this field because she had a cousin who had benefited from OT services as a child, and because she understood from watching that cousin that what occupational therapy gives children is not the correction of what is wrong with them, but the expansion of what is possible for them. She found this distinction compelling when she was 21 and deciding what to do with her life, and she finds it compelling still. The expansion of what is possible. That was the thing worth spending a career on. She is the person who spent 9 hours working with children on a Saturday and came home to 11 birthday party photos. She is the person who sat at a kitchen table and went through those photos in order and was steady. She is the person who organized 2 difficult conversations and had them well, and held the line at exactly the places the line needed to be held, and did not go past those places into cruelty or excess. She is the person who, at Lily's birthday party 6 days later, leaned down beside her 4-year-old in the yellow dress in front of a unicorn cake and blew out 4 candles, and was exactly where she was supposed to be. Helen called her a complication. Helen meant this as a criticism of Morgan's presence, her involvement, her opinions, her desire to be included in decisions about her own daughter. What Helen did not understand was that being a complication, in the sense of being a person with presence and opinions and rights who does not simply recede when her presence is inconvenient, is not a flaw. It is what a mother is. It is what a partner is. It is what a person with standing in her own family is. Morgan was not a complication. She was the mother. There is no birthday party without the mother. The honest answer, which she gives in the form it deserves, not the social version, not the everything is fine version, is, we are functional and we are getting better. Helen and Bill are in Lily's life. They are at the Saturday parties and the Sunday dinners, and the occasional weeknight when Morgan and Derek need coverage and Helen and Bill provide it with the genuine delight of grandparents who love their granddaughter and are glad to have time with her. Lily loves them. Lily will grow up with grandparents who are present and loving, and whose relationship to her is not complicated by adult conflict that she was never supposed to carry. The relationship between Morgan and Helen is not warm. It is something more durable than warm. It is functional and honest and boundaried, and within those boundaries there is real goodwill on both sides. Helen has not repeated the pattern of the April party. Whether she will not repeat it because she has genuinely understood the cost, or because she understands the consequences now, or because some combination of both, Morgan cannot say. She is watching the behavior. The behavior is the evidence. Derek is different in the ways that matter. He is not a fully remade person. He is the person he has always been, with the same fundamental tendencies, working actively on the one that cost the marriage the most. The working on is visible and consistent. He catches himself. He corrects. He says, "Let me talk to Morgan," more than he says, "Yes, I'll handle it." These are small things that are large things. She knows the difference. And Lily. Lily is 4 years old and will be 5 in April, and has strong opinions about the birthday cake flavor situation. And Percy the elephant is still a constant. And she drew a picture of the birthday party last week that she gave to Morgan. A crayon rendering of a table and a cake, and 2 figures, one tall and one short, with the careful handwriting of a preschooler spelling out what she wanted it to say. "Mommy and Emmy," it said. Morgan put it on the refrigerator. It is there now. That is the whole story.